Previously, on the Viewers Club.
I mean, they bring up the fact of the horses almost instantly.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
just like, it's the first thing they comment on.
Welcome to today's episode of the Viewers Club. I will be your moderator, Osama Mazgori.
My name Megan.
My name is Lucas.
And it's Tess.
Thank you. Now, before we begin, just a quick word. Everything you're about to hear is highly opinionated. None of this is fact. If we do not mention something that you like, please do not come after us. Thank you. Now then, today's topic is going to be decade-defining movies.
Awesome.
The criteria for picking a decade-defining movie is either a film that has impacted you personally, or a film that you feel has impacted the film industry. We will be going in decade order starting from the 1940s. Each member of our group has 2 films apiece, 2 decades, and the order will be me, Tess, me, Megan, Tess, Lucas. All right. We begin with the 1940s. So the film that I picked for the 1940s is The Maltese Falcon.
Ooh.
And the reason why I picked this is because I have seen it once before, and it's a very good memory of mine. I saw it with my grandparents. And it's a very old movie. It's a film noir, and it is essentially the detective film that changed detective films going forward. Let's just give a quick synopsis here. Un momento, por favor.
Parlez-vous, Francois?
The Maltese Falcon is a film noir directed and scripted by John Huston, based on the 1930 book, novel, whatever, The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett. It stars Humphrey Bogart as Sam Spade, a private investigator, and the story follows Sam Spade as he goes around with 3 unscrupulous adventures, all of which are revolving around a jewel-encrusted falcon statue. Now, this film, ratings alone, people have, rated it highly, but like I said, this film holds a personal attachment to me because it was something I saw with my grandparents a while back, and I've always loved the film noir genre. And this one has shaped it. I mean, you got anything that tries to mimic film noir at this point, there's always some reference to the movie. And I can't remember much off the top of my head, but the one that I do remember the most clearly is there was actually an episode of The A-Team where it was a parody episode of The Maltese Falcon called The Maltese Cow. It's just a quick little tidbit, like I said.
Nice.
I think it's so interesting how a movie from the 40s, like the 40s had so many huge movies that came out, and how it influenced the rest of film is so interesting. Some other films that came from the 40s, if I can input some that.
Oh yeah.
For me, a lot of the films from the 40s revolved around noir, so Double Indemnity was the big one that I thought was going to get brought up, but you're right, the Maltese Falcon is a really, really great one as well. And then you have films that are the complete opposite, but not really, Casablanca has a little bit of that film noir in it. Citizen Kane, again, they're really big on the mysteries in the 40s, weren't they?
Yeah. Anybody else has any input?
I actually have yet to see that, so
Same.
yeah.
Yeah, I have not seen it.
It gets brought up in so many.
Actually, you were saying, Megan?
I was saying it gets brought up in so many in comedies a lot. They'll bring it up in so many movies in general. It gets brought up, and it's one of those movies that not a lot of people have seen it, but they have heard of it. So it'll be oh, have you seen The Maltese Falcon? And they'll be oh, I've always wondered what that is. It gets brought up all the time.
Right.
I actually have a little trivia here about the Maltese Falcon I prepared.
Oh no.
Yeah. So actually, it was.
Yeah.
Thank you for that enthusiasm.
We're in the same boat.
Trivia.
We're in the same boat, Tessa.
Trivia.
We're in the same boat.
Okay.
No, but just it received the highest ratings in the 40s. It was considered one of the best films of the 40s, which, like Megan was saying earlier, was a very competitive time for film. There was a lot going on. And those ratings, those critic approvals that has actually carried on now, because on Rotten Tomatoes, you know, the Maltese Falcon has like 100% approval rating, you know? And so I thought that was just an interesting piece of trivia.
Mm-hmm.
And it's received 3 award nominations, actually, for Best Picture, Best Supporting Actor, and Best Adapted Screenplay.
Wow.
That's so cool.
And what's funny is there's a story was the actor that they got, I believe his name was Humphrey Bogart.
Mhm.
They wanted a different actor, but he thought this movie wouldn't do well, so he bowed out. And this started a trend, because every time they tried to get that same actor in for another movie, he'd bow out. They'd bring in another guy, and the movie would be widely successful.
Nice.
But yeah, that's what I got on the Maltese Falcon. Definitely give it a watch. Like I said, it's a film that holds dear to my heart,
Nice.
and it's something you're going to see mentions of in a lot of different films.
Nice.
When you said
All right, moving on.
when you said trivia,
You go ahead, Lucas.
when you said trivia, I didn't know you meant like fun facts about the film. I thought you meant you were gonna test
Yeah.
us on it,
Yeah, me too.
and so I was really worried. I was like,
Time
I was
travel
ready
for
test,
it.
ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
You will all fail.
Why would I test anybody? I hate tests.
I don't know.
All right,
I was
then.
under the same impression.
And with that, we jump 10 years into the future,
Ooh.
to the 1950s.
Yes.
Insert Back to the Future sound.
Yeah.
Done.
And for the 1950s, the one film that really stood out to me was Singing in the Rain. Have you guys seen it?
I have not
No.
seen it, but I've seen clips of
What? Okay.
I want to see.
You're gonna have to watch it. It is a classic. It's kind of like, well, I mean, it is a musical. It's a musical rom-com, and it has Gene Kelly, Donald O'Connor, and Debbie Reynolds in it, and it is just like one of those feel-good, fun-loving movies, and yeah, it's timeless. I absolutely love it. I'm trying to find exactly what awards it has.
That's like
It's
a
a catchy
really
song.
good choice. For
Yeah.
Singing in the Rain, I think is a really good choice because, again, it's one of those movies that I don't think a lot of people have seen, but they know it exists.
Yeah.
You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
And you have stiff competition for picking from the 50s again. Like, James Stewart was in
know.
so many movies in the
Mm.
50s, and then Alfred Hitchcock had a whole bunch of movies come out in the 50s, like
Yeah.
Rear Window, North by
Yes.
Northwest.
Rear Window is another really good one. I love that movie.
And
It's so like
Rebel Without
simple,
a
but
Cause,
genius.
Some Like It Hot,
Ooh.
All About Eve. I just have so many movies picked
Love
up.
that one.
Vertigo.
I haven't seen Vertigo yet.
Watch too many movies.
Oh, man.
But yeah.
Hitchcock had some really. It's insane how competitive, like, all of these movies are. You know what I mean? But yet so many
Yeah.
people know these iconic movies exist. Even
Mhm.
Cinderella came out in 1950. Creature
Right.
of Black Lagoon. It's like, and then of course you have Meryl Streep, who's or not Meryl Streep,
Like,
Marilyn Monroe.
wait.
Meryl Streep comes later. But let's also agree that Meryl Streep's timeless. But
Yes. Yes.
Marilyn Monroe,
She's timeless.
Marilyn Monroe and James Stewart seem to be huge in the 50s.
Mm, yeah.
You know
Oh,
what I
yeah.
mean? Like, James Stewart was in almost everything, and then you have Marilyn Monroe, who's also been in almost everything.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. But anyways,
Oh my gosh.
with Singing in the Rain, I think one of my favorite like aspects of this movie was that well, it's following like this filmmaker, this actor, and like with each different song, like he enters like a whole different world, and they have like all the like these theatrical like setups and designs, and like all the characters are in that like imaginary world, and it's really cool. And
Cool.
that's why it like really, I don't know, it's one of my favorites from that era.
It seems to be very much like, is it filmed like it was for stage? Like if it were to be performed?
Yes, it kind of goes back and forth, and it also shows like the actual studio like the film studio.
Mm.
So it'll show like the cameras and like the lights and stuff coming in. So it's very different.
Nice.
And then it'll switch
I'll
to
have to
like
watch
more
this.
like a film. Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty cool. So yeah, that's what
That's
I have
cool.
for the 50s.
Nice.
And then, you know, Gene Kelly was also the
Oh,
king.
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
anything that
yeah.
required any dancing.
yes.
Oh,
Yes.
man. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Man, these are just movies I need
a
to
good
see.
choice.
I feel really bad. Like, I haven't seen these. They just are all movies.
Oh, you poor baby.
I need to... I am.
You're the baby of the group too.
I need to see all of them. I'm a wee
You
lad.
just need to watch every movie of all time. If only there was a way to do that. God, there's so
No.
many.
All right, then. As we venture off the 50s and move into the 60s, we now return to me, unfortunately.
Oh,
We now have
Don't say that.
That's hard.
Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins is a
Ooh.
1964
Oh.
American
Yes.
musical fantasy film
Classic.
by
Yes.
Robert Stevenson and produced by Walt Disney, with songs written and composed by the Sherman Brothers. Now, enough
Nice.
for the reading portion. Mary Poppins was originally a book written by P.L. Travers,
Mm.
and that's what the film was based off of.
Saving Mr.
And
Banks. yeah.
this film had an all-star cast.
Oh my
and
God, it did.
This was the film. Like, I mean, I remember, I'm a 90s kid, and I remember watching this as a kid. This was something that,
Mhm.
you
This
know,
is a
Yeah.
very
forget all the
timeless-
remakes they tried
It's
to
one of
make.
Yeah.
my childhood
You know.
movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same.
It's so timeless.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Brings back
Yeah.
memories
It's
of my
so
grandparents.
nostalgic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you have the all-star cast, you know, Julie Andrews, Dick
Yeah.
Van
Queen.
Dyke,
Julie
Oh.
Andrews.
Dave Van Dyke, amazing.
you know.
Love it. One of the
Horrible
worst
accent,
British
but
accents.
amazing actor.
Yeah.
Chill, chill.
Yeah. And it's, you know, this movie won 5 awards.
Mm.
Mhm.
It won Best Actress for Julie Andrews, Best Film
Deserved.
Editing, Best Original
Deserved.
Music Score,
Mhm.
Best Visual Effects, and Best Original Song for Chim Chim Cheree.
Yes.
Just all around.
They're all of
best.
them.
Like
Yeah, they're all
deserved
great.
every award that it got for sure.
Mhm.
Absolutely amazing.
And,
what-
you know, in
yeah.
2013, recently, it was actually put into the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress
I heard
Wow.
about
as culturally,
that. Yeah.
historically, or aesthetically significant. You know,
Mhm.
this is an honor very few films get. You know, I forgot to mention this with the Maltese Falcon, but that's the same case.
Mhm.
It was also added to the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress.
Mhm.
Wow.
You know, we've talked a little about Mary Poppins. I'll give a little bit of the, you know, a little bit of the synopsis for those of you who have not seen it.
How dare you?
It's set in 1910. George Banks returns home at Cherry Tree Lane to learn his wife, Winifred, that Katie, Nana, has left their service after the children. Jane and Michael have run away for the 4th time this month. This is not a synopsis. Essentially, you know, I'm gonna give you my summary. New nanny comes in, magical adventures, Dick Van Dyke, chimney sweep, umbrella.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
My description doesn't really do justice, but
It's
That's
it's
pretty
amazing
accurate,
that this movie
yeah.
stands out. It's amazing that this movie stands out amongst all of the other movies that came out in the 60s. And I mean, there are a lot of movies that came out in the 60s as well that it competed with. And yet it's one of the only ones I clearly remember from
Right.
the 60s. I mean, you have movies coming up against it like Psycho 2001, Space
Mhm.
Odyssey, The Graduate, Doctor Strangelove, you know.
Mhm.
You have, I mean, the list goes on and on. The Sound of Music, Breakfast at Tiffany's, West Side Story, like
Right.
so many. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Like
Right. Oh
it
my
was
gosh.
just, it had so many movies going against it, and yet it still is such an amazing classic.
Mhm.
I remember
Everybody
the
knows
music. I remember the yeah. It's so nostalgic, and it's such a beautifully made movie. And then you have it coming against some other movies that, like the recreation, Mary Poppins Returns, right?
Mhm.
That was, I wouldn't say that was better than the original. I think the original is still my favorite, but it offered
Mhm.
a lot more to the character
Mhm.
as well. And then getting to see the backstory of it and saving Mr. Banks
Mhm.
was-
Oh yes.
uh,
Yes.
that was so
And the
that was so
Thompson.
good,
I
and
have my heart.
and it and I think it just brings more to the
Mhm.
nostalgia
Uh-huh.
of the original Mary Poppins.
I love that it's the opposite of what she wanted. It's like the exact opposite of what she wanted.
I
But then it
know.
turned out fine.
Mhm.
Yeah, so yeah, Travers and Walt Disney actually did have a lot of issues with that, and she actually was not invited to the party,
Wow.
but she went anyway. She found an invitation, and she went up to Walt Disney and said, I don't approve of any of this. And he looked at her and he told her, "It's what's done is done. Move on."
Mhm.
Mm.
And so, anyways, gonna talk a little about the legacy of Mary Poppins, and it's considered to be Walt Disney's crowning achievement because it was the only Disney film that actually won a Best Picture award in his lifetime.
Wow.
And then even the legacy is not only accolades and stuff like that. There's actually physical legacy too, because the Walt Disney monorail system that you see in all the Walt Disney worlds, the base money that came to build those actually came from Mary Poppins.
Wow.
Oh, that's so cool.
Cool.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
I did not know that.
So this is not just the monorails themselves, all the safety devices, and they actually named the monorail system MAPO, which is MA from Mary and PO from Poppins.
Aw.
That's really
It's
cute.
amazing.
So that's what I got on Mary Poppins. It's now time for another flash forward. We now go to the 70s. Please do not drop acid.
Woo! Too
God.
late.
Woo!
No.
So
Seeing
many people are going to
smells.
be so angry, including myself. So I just want to say this. I think the 2 decades that you gave me are the most difficult to choose movies from
Yeah.
To
ever.
be fair, those decades were picked in anonymous draw.
They were.
Mm.
Still the most difficult I ever had to choose from because the amount of nostalgia that comes from the 70s and the 80s for me is way out there. Like I've seen
Mhm.
so many movies with my family and stuff on just the 70s and 80s alone from my childhood. So I kind of have to go with ones that I remember watching when I was younger just for the
Mhm.
nostalgia factor. And I have a huge list in front of me and I still can't choose which ones are my favorite. So the 70s kind of gets broken up into 4 movies from my childhood. Because I
Cool.
can't choose. When I tell you guys the 4 that I have picked, you're going to understand why I can't choose from them. Monty Python came out in the
Yes.
70s.
Yes.
Grease came out in the 70s.
Uh-huh.
Alien, 70s. And Star Wars
yes.
A New Hope also
Oh.
came out in the 70s. So
I get it.
that's not even half of the movies I have written down for ones that I could pick from the 70s. I think the 70s in general, I think shows a big transition into what people were watching at the
Mhm.
time, which is what I'm going to choose to talk about
Definitely.
instead. Because again, I can't choose. So a lot of it goes into action and horror in particular.
Mhm.
The 70s in particular had so many horror movies. Halloween, Carrie. You got and Jaws also. But it's just,
Yeah.
it was such a difficult
Yeah.
decade to choose movies from because choosing one that affected me personally is very difficult because so many of them have nostalgia from when I watched them with my family, but others of them are like, you're one of the reasons I want to make movies in the future,
Right.
So I had to pick 4 that personally for me inspire me the most. Sorry for anyone who disagrees. So again,
Objection.
Monty Python. So again, for me, those movies include Monty Python, Grease, Alien, and Star Wars New Hope. So
Nice. Yeah.
I don't know about you guys.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and what you're saying about horror, I mean, Alien, that changed the horror genre as well, because that was one of the first times they really took let's do a thriller, but in space. yeah. You know, like they were really like, let's do that, and
It's-
it worked.
Mhm.
It's fantastic. It's
You know
scary.
what the great part about that movie is that in my mind it's horror, but at also at the same point for me, it's also one of the best monster movies in
Yeah.
history.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Grease was one of the movies I would watch with my friends, so that's like one of the best
Yeah.
musicals in my opinion
Right.
out there. People are disagreeing with me, but as far as this decade, as far as the 70s goes, Grease by far the best. Monty Python, we've talked about Monty Python. Go listen to
We
our
have.
talk on Monty Python
pretty
and you'll
great.
understand why we love that
We
movie.
love it. We can't stop
and then
quoting
of
it.
course the reason I picked Star Wars: A New Hope is that Star Wars is still relevant today.
Right.
Literally.
Yep.
It's they just
Absolutely.
finished up the current trilogy, and then they're cleaning up and finishing up the Clone Wars, right? That's the
Yes.
yeah.
Gotta
So
binge that.
again, this was a very difficult decade to pick from. Sorry for breaking your rules, Osama. I just could not do it.
It's fine. I don't even remember my own rules. Wait.
To pick one movie from each decade. Could not do it. Fight me.
Fight.
That's fine. I think we said minimum one movie.
Oh, okay. I thought
Yeah.
the maximum was one movie. Yeah. Anyway,
Nice.
that's me on the 70s. I don't know if anyone else has
Agreed.
any comments.
No, I mean, you were absolutely right. Star Wars, I mean, that launched a franchise and a legacy that's still around today. Alien's one of the best monster movies ever. Grease, I love Grease. I was Eugene in Teen Angel when my high school did that, so a lot of great memories of Grease.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. That was the weirdest character shift ever in a musical, because I went, I'm Eugene, and then really suave, your story's sad to tell. It was great memory. So,
For
I
those of you
wish-
who aren't aware,
so
Elvis is in the
thankful.
house.
Yeah.
Oh God, I wish I could have seen that. Oh man. Shall I jump forward, Osama?
Yes, so now we leave the 70s and cruise on into the 80s.
Woo!
Oh, Jesus help me. I thought
No.
the 70s were difficult. Ooh. The 80s were a nightmare. Yeah, I'm literally looking at every movie I've ever seen in my childhood just in the 80s. Like, I'm not
Right.
joking.
Yeah.
My tweens, my when I was a kid, every movie that I can name came from the 80s, and that list is 10 times longer than the 70s, and I still will not give you one movie. I have like if you guys could
I
see
refuse.
the list I have at least 25 movies written down, and that can't even
It's
be
true.
half of the
Wow.
movies that I've seen in the 80s.
It's very true.
Wow.
So
Just list 'em
I'm
up.
just going to talk about I'm just going to talk about the overall feel I had from the 80s that transitioned from like the 70s. So like the 70s was a huge impact for like horror movies in general. The 80s also had a few in there,
Mhm.
which is where my first one comes into play. The Shining, I have to
Mm.
mention, because
Mhm.
it was the first horror movie I ever saw, and it's one of the movies that has inspired me to become a filmmaker when I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life.
Mhm.
So The Shining is like big on my list of that. But another like huge transition away from that was the inclusion of so many like teen angst / like coming of age stories, you know? And most of them were done by the same guy. Like, I'm not joking. Most of them were done by the same director.
Yeah.
I have to add into
He
this
just took
genre
all
in
of
particular.
his yeah, he took all of his
Oh my God,
rage
right?
of being an angsty female teenager and put that into his movie.
It was so good, and those movies have to be The Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, 16 Candles, you know,
Oh, yeah.
Dirty Dancing. It's like they're all like coming of age stories, and there were so many of them. Like Pretty in Pink, The Karate Kid. I'm like, the list is insane of how many of these I
ridiculous.
can
I
just
love it.
name off. Oh my gosh. And then like musicals and dancing in general were also popular. Dirty Dancing, Footloose. going on
Right.
forever because I can't stop myself. Indiana Jones also came out in the 80s, so that was big. You had more of the Star Wars coming out as well. Back to the Future, E.T., Ghostbusters, When Harry Met Sally, Say Anything, Beetlejuice, Aliens, the sequel. There's an S at the end of it, so it's
Right.
a sequel. And then to kind of choose another one that holds huge nostalgia for me. This is like huge, like peak nostalgia is Top Gun.
Yeah.
I used to watch Top Gun so much with my dad. Like,
Yeah.
the movie would play and he would quote every line before the actor said it. It's just
Wow. That's awesome.
That's great.
and honestly, I think that movie is also pretty iconic as well, and the fact that they're
Mhm.
making a sequel, and we all live in San Diego, and they were filming the
Yeah.
Top Gun 2 Maverick not too long ago. You know, what made it even better for me, that gives me big nostalgia, and it's a story I wish to tell, is that during Comic-Con last year,
Yeah.
Mhm.
we got tickets to see Conan O'Brien, and his special secret guest that he had was Tom Cruise. So it was like,
Nice.
Nice.
yeah. I also have
Love
to give a big shout out to The Princess Bride, which I don't think I mentioned, also
Oh my
came out
gosh, yes.
in the 80s. But literally, if you want to see why I'm having issues picking just one movie to define why the 80s is such a great year for movies, just look up movies from the 80s. You will understand why.
Right. Oh my
But
gosh.
yeah, I think for me, the big one comes down to Top Gun. Just primarily for nostalgia purposes alone.
Mhm.
Right.
I don't know, have you guys ever seen Top Gun before?
I saw it for the first time like a year ago.
Wow.
Everyone
I haven't seen it, but
hated
I was
me.
working at Seaport Village while they were working on the new one.
Oh, dude,
Ooh.
nice. Basically, and I'm gonna give a quick English. I'm gonna give a quick synopsis then of what Top Gun is. Top Gun follows the story of Tom Cruise's character Maverick through his disciplinary struggles with the Air Force. Basically, he flies jets, you know.
Right.
And he pulled some shit that his superiors didn't like, so they sent him back to training. And through all of that, he kind of finds himself, his own, like, his strengths and his weaknesses. He falls in love because why not, you know?
It's
And
the
they
80s.
fly jets.
Woo! That's all you need.
So that's all you need, man. It's,
Say no
I think
more.
it's a really good. Yeah, say no more. Watch it. It's
no
amazing. And before people start yelling at me that I'm not mentioning like the Terminator or Die Hard, let's just move on now.
All right then. Angry comments can go down below. We'll get to them.
No.
Probably never.
Right.
Anyways, moving on to the next decade. We have the 90s.
Yay. Oh my goodness. Okay, the 90s, again, my childhood. So, there's not just one movie. Okay, in the 90s, we've got Clueless, The Matrix, Titanic, Jurassic Park, Forrest Gump, Home Alone. Home Alone was a big
no.
one for my childhood.
Yes.
Groundhog
Oh
Day.
my gosh.
I tried recreating that
Yes.
stuff, got in trouble.
Oh my god.
Oh, no. Oh, man.
we also
I rented
got-
all 4 of them.
Oh, really? Have
Yeah,
you seen all of them?
I found all of them because I couldn't get enough of them. I was like, wow,
Yeah.
this is great. And then they changed the kid. And I was like, no, it's not.
No.
Kevin McAllister,
No.
come back.
Yeah. But we also got Fight Club, Goodfellas, Men in Black, Lion King.
Ah, childhood.
Silence of the
Crazy.
Lambs, Forrest Gump,
Yeah.
Schindler's List. Oh my god,
Oh,
Mrs. Doubtfire.
Schindler's
Sleepless in
List? That is
Seattle.
my favorite film of all time. Ugh.
Edward
But
Scissorhands.
just keep in mind, making a claim like that on here is very risky.
Well, yeah. Well,
Oh.
it's Spielberg.
But it's Schindler's List, so.
It's
But yeah.
Schindler's List and it's Spielberg, and it makes me feel something.
But also,
Don't make sounds like that.
Tessa, you were saying.
Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction is like one of my
Yes.
favorites.
Jeez.
So that's my top one for the 90s, but it's really hard because there's a ton of really good films from the 90s. So,
Right.
yeah.
Oh my god, Shawshank Redemption's on here.
Right?
There's so many.
The Lion
I know.
King? Oh my
Yeah.
god.
Lion King.
There's so many. Did I ever tell you about my thing with the Lion King?
No.
I never saw
Pretty
it.
Woman, sorry,
What's your
continue.
thing?
I never saw it until like way past I should have.
Oh, really?
It was
What do you mean,
What?
like, way past you should have? Like,
like it should have been a childhood movie,
Like
and I didn't
past
see it
5?
till like
Uh,
yes, like I saw it when I was in high school. I was like,
oh my god, Lucas.
that's a.
I'm so angry with you. How dare you?
It's-
That's a
I know.
childhood.
I know.
Oh my god.
oh my gosh, they have
It's-
Babe
it's a-
from the
The
90s.
Blair Witch Project. The Sixth Sense. Ooh, can I spoil The Sixth Sense? Because people always get angry when I do,
I
but the
would
movie's
wait.
like 50 years
I
old.
would wait.
Wow.
I would wait.
It's not 50 years old, but the movie's been out way too long for people to be like, ew, don't
Right.
spoil it
You
for
should have
me.
known. Yeah.
He's been dead
Are
the
we
whole
done
time.
with the 90s?
We are
There's too
never
much of
done
the
with the
90s.
90s, Osama. It's never
Now
over.
we move on to the 2000s,
Ah.
also known as the years of Jesse McCartney,
Yeah.
the Jonas Brothers, Backstreet
Ooh.
Boys,
Yeah.
My
all those
childhood.
that we really don't care much about now.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So the 2000s holds a very special place in my heart, mainly because it was the decade I was born, and because that was the decade
You're so
in
young.
which I came into the world, and all of the. It's funny because all of the stuff that I saw growing up was from the 2000s, but I always favored the stuff that wasn't in that decade. So I, but 2000s incredibly important, especially for film. It was, I would say, the first decade where like where video was first used instead of, it was where films were made primarily with digital cameras instead of actual film. I think it was the first decade where it was mostly made with digital and that switch was happening. So things were getting a new kind of look that they didn't have before. I would say I I narrowed it down to one film that has a lot of nostalgic value to me, and also just a film that I think really set a giant precedent within the 2000s, and it was The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. And that's the third movie in the Lord of the Rings franchise. For those of you that don't know, The Lord of the Rings is too complicated for me to ever describe. It's about
It's too complicated for anyone to describe.
it's about a fantasy world with hobbits and wizards and rings, and it's amazing.
Oh my.
So go watch it now.
And if you don't know what hobbits are, watch it.
watch it right now.
Mind if I give a simplified version real quick?
Give a simplified version. Do it.
Short guys, rings, orcs, long journey, falcons that were never used.
Huh? Yeah.
So accurate.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Sounds like every reality show. So basically, Lord of the Rings. The reason I picked The Return of the King specifically is because, okay. So the reason I picked The Lord of the Rings was because I believe that franchise and the emergence of those incredibly successful and popular films within the fantasy genre really shaped that whole genre for years to come, because people finally it appealed to a massive amount of people. People realized, oh, we can make movies like this and people will like it, people will watch it. This is something that can appeal to a larger audience, and you can get the same kind of drama and character development in a world that's based in magic and dragons and fantasy, and that really hadn't been seen before. I said in the Monty Python video that I
Watch our
don't
Monty
believe that.
Python. Listen to our Monty
Please,
Python
yes,
podcast.
listen to that
it. Don't watch it.
Listen to it. And I don't think many fantasy in media today, like Game of Thrones and even The Witcher, which we talked about in another podcast. Go listen to it.
Listen to The Witcher.
I don't think they would have had the same kind of success, or more even the same kind of stability in terms of people willing to support it, had it not been for the success of The Lord of the Rings. And I don't know if many people would have wanted to actually try to experience it had this not launched. And funnily enough, same thing for the books, the book series Lord of the Rings. Like, that emerged fantasy as a genre that people wanted to read, and then it launched the whole genre. Like, so much of anything Lord of the Rings is groundbreaking, but more so why
Lord of the Rings is going to have to be a topic that we discuss in
right.
another
I mean,
episode.
I can go on for hours and hours and hours. Peter Jackson, I love you. So, and also the reason I picked Return of the King was because Return of the King, and I have it pulled up here, you might hear some mouse clicks. So, Return of the King, it is widely regarded as one of the greatest, most influential fantasy films ever made. It won all 11 awards that it was nominated for at the Academy Awards, and it is tied along with Ben-Hur and the Titanic for a film receiving the most awards at the Academy of the most Oscars. It is tied for receiving the most.
I don't think
awards.
anyone's gonna.
No, it has not.
I don't think anyone's gonna argue with that.
No, it is
Like,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It showed
Mhm.
that this genre, this whole genre, it's something that can make awards. It can really, it can. I didn't want to say touch people in a way that they haven't been touched before, because that sounds weird. So it can really reach out and
Weird is what we do.
yeah, it can really reach out and bring about that large audience that people weren't expecting, and it influenced movies beyond fantasy and every genre that had to do with fiction and world building. This had and dear Lord, the production design, the actors. Everything about it is phenomenal. I love this film. I can go on for hours, but I won't, because I have another decade.
I'm going to mention a few before we move on, because
Please do.
The Lord of the Rings, really good. Some other top choices on here: The Hurt Locker, amazing,
Mhm.
great job, Catherine Bigelow, absolutely fantastic. Pixar was killing it in the early 2000s as
It
well.
was.
The Incredibles,
It was.
WALL-E, Finding
Mhm.
Nemo. Not to mention
Mhm.
Hayao Miyazaki's Spirited Away.
Oh yeah.
The
It was a huge moment for animation.
the formerly top-grossing movie of all time, Avatar.
yeah. Was that
No longer holds that position anymore.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, I
God,
mean,
there's so
it's-
many Mean Girls. Shrek. I can't believe
Oh
you
my-
didn't mention Shrek.
I know.
Okay.
I know. I couldn't. I
Shaun
had
of the
to.
Dead.
I picked
Casino
one.
Royale.
I picked one that I thought really encapsulated the 2000s. It really. I mean, I don't like with Avatar.
Fantasy was
that
huge.
amount of world build. It was huge, and it was because of Lord of the Rings. It was
Mm-hmm.
that was a big reason why fantasy was big, and making those worlds.
Fantasy was
But
also
absolutely.
Fantasy was
Yeah.
also huge, and I'm going to say this now because it will get brought up when other people
I mean,
message
Harry
us
Potter
on
as
our,
well.
on our
Yeah.
Instagram that's what I was going to bring up. Harry Potter,
Uh-huh.
Pan's Labyrinth,
Uh-huh.
you know. There's
Absolutely.
just so many.
And I don't
think
I
that
don't
the
mean
2000s
to
is
gloss
like the-
over that, but it was
No,
yeah.
no, of course, but
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring him up. So
There's so
anyway,
there's
I'm
so
done
many
bringing
films.
stuff up.
There's so many films. No,
And
no,
now we
please.
wave goodbye to the
Anyway,
2000s, where
there's-
we wish we could be instead of where we are right now.
Yeah.
And we move on to the 2010s.
Yes.
Ooh.
And the film that I picked for 2010s, and there's so many that I could pick.
Ooh.
Especially, but I think the one that I
I think I know what you're gonna pick.
the one that I think really maybe I don't
I
know.
think I know which one you're gonna pick.
Um,
I think I know.
Well, the one that I think really highlights the whole decade is the first Avengers movie. And the reason I say the first Avengers movie is because it launched a franchise that spanned the entire decade and now has a movie that is the top grossing film of all time. You know, I mean, I feel like, and it started with Iron Man, and then it built up. But the Avengers, which came out in 2012, that was the first time anything like the Avengers films that we see later on. That was the first time anything like it had been done before, where you had all of these superheroes, you had all of these movies, they were all coming together, and it's something that the success of that not only launched this franchise, but it affected every other movie series that hoped to be a franchise. Like DC is like it literally, it was like, okay, we got to do what Marvel was doing because that was really successful, and like everybody started copying that. It was a huge impact on how films are made and how they're produced, especially.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
That's very true.
I think it really spanned across so many, like, even it was reviving, I think, I don't want to say inspiring. It was reviving a lot of films, and I think that it was reviving a lot of films that had once been, like, quote, dead. And I say this in the nicest way possible. You don't need to recreate movies that were made 30 years ago, and yet, because I think Marvel was creating this astounding franchise that people were just like, oh, I can totally...
Right, yeah.
I can totally do that. But I think I have to agree with you on that one. And there were so many
it's
movies.
not just movies that...
There's so many movies.
It's not just movies that try...
Can't even... Oh my gosh. So many movies. There was one that I picked. It's not really... It was a movie that I picked that wasn't necessarily... I don't know if I already screwed it up or not, because it might have been the last decade. No, it wasn't. It was this decade. So it's not one that I think necessarily had an impact on the world of film in a big way, but it's something that really influenced me and holds a lot of nostalgic value for me in that decade. And it was Super 8. By J.J. Abrams, Steven Spielberg. And the reason I say that is because watching that and seeing kids who, you know, at the time I was around the same age as the kids that were in the film when it came out. So it's 2011, so I would have been around 9, and they were in that age range. And seeing that, it really sparked an interest in film. It made me think, I can do that. You know, these kids are doing that. I can go out and I can make something. I can, you know, it doesn't matter how old. It's just you go out and you can make something with your friends. And I've wanted to capture that with, like, every film that I make, just making it with friends and having a good time. So I always think back on that because it really inspired me to be a filmmaker, because I saw kids being a filmmaker. I was like, yes.
Love it.
But yeah, I would say Avengers, the first one, as far as impact on society, and then of course you have Endgame. Pretty much every Marvel movie that became really popular.
I wouldn't say every Marvel movie, but
not everyone.
I'll definitely give props.
Like every movie other than Phase 1.
I think I have to give props also to Black Panther.
Oh yeah.
For coming out. Like there's so many, like, groundbreaking movies that it may seem like we're glossing over, but we're not. There's so many groundbreaking movies. No,
there's just too many. It's like
there's too many.
And it's funny. I might get a lot of controversy for this. So
you're gonna get a lot of controversy.
I'm gonna get a lot of controversy regardless. No, and Black Panther's another one because it was like it was nominated for Best Picture. I mean, it was nominated for so many awards that no other
superhero
Marvel
movies have
film
never
had
done that before.
No, and it really launched, which is funny because I remember thinking, like, when that happened, I was like, cool, I'm so glad about this. Why wasn't Civil War nominated for Best Picture? I was like, why this is great, but why why is this just happening now? Oh my gosh. But I would say that had not only a big impact on that franchise, but just every franchise in general. Like, everyone was trying to do the Marvel thing, or the Marvel routine.
The Marvel formula.
Film. Yeah, they were all trying to, and that's what sparked it. So, I would say that.
God, Osama, do you have something to say?
Yes, please.
I was just gonna say, as we near the end of our time, does anybody have any closing comments? But it appears
I'm sorry.
we will have a closing soon.
Closing
Well,
comments.
Watch
Who do you want
Shrek.
to start with, Osama?
I don't have one. I was asking if anybody had any closing comments.
If you guys have any movies that defined the decades that we talked about for you
Mhm.
personally, for nostalgia or whatever, let us know on our social media handles at
Mhm.
the Viewers Club on Instagram,
Mhm.
and tell us what movies you think inspired you personally for the decade, or ones that you just really love.
Yes.
And if you disagreed with any of our opinions here and have for some reason taken it personally, I will meet you behind the Kroger's in Houston, Texas.
Mhm.
Stop.
Yeah. Iron Knuckles. Let's do
And
it.
with that, I think we are closing up, are we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go watch 1917. Do it. Just
Knives
watch
Out,
it.
do it. Just like so
All
many
of them.
movies.
All right, this is Osama. Signing off.
This be
Oh,
Megan. Bye bye.
This is Lucas with a K.
And this is
Goodbye.
Tess. Bye.
Bye. Bye.